Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is Dan Freeman from ALA Publishing. We are really glad to have you here today for our January episode of American Libraries Live. We're going to be talking about virtual reference, and we are really excited to have you all involved in our discussion. I just want to start by introducing our panel. First, I want to introduce Viviana Bowman-Svetkovic. Welcome, Viviana.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Glad to have you here. Viviana is a reference librarian and the web administrator at the Rutgers University Libraries. Next, I want to welcome Francisca Goldsmith. Welcome, Francisca.
Hi.
Francisca is a consultant and instructor with over 25 years of reference experience. And finally, I want to welcome Sujin Huggins. Welcome, Sujin. And Sujin is a professor of library and information science at Dominican University here in the Chicago area. So I want to start just by giving a quick definition of virtual reference for the purposes of today's conversation. And it's going to be a real simple one. We're just going to define virtual reference as any reference services that are provided online. So that could be any online format. It could be email. It could be Twitter. I guess we're including text as an online format. So it's a pretty general definition, but I think as we go through our discussion today, it'll become clear that it is an appropriate definition. So I want to start just by sort of asking a quick question of everybody on the panel. We know that there's an increasing demand for virtual reference services. So I just want to ask everybody, if you were to if someone were to ask you for a sort of an elevator speech, like a quick response, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the library community today when it comes to providing virtual reference services? And Sujin, why don't we start with you? Oh, Sujin, sorry, we can't hear you. Oops. Let's see. Let's move over to Viviana.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, no. Okay, now we can hear you. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Yes, I was just about to say that in public libraries in particular, I would think that one of the biggest challenges is consistency in providing the service to the population. Generally, you tend to multitask, and so there isn't a dedicated virtual reference person. And if you are providing face-to-face reference and telephone reference, and you're expected to provide virtual reference, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to do all three, and so that can undermine the intention to provide the service. And so you have to really think through.
Oh, so Jen, it sounds like you just got muted again.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and thank you for that answer. Before we move on to Viviana, I meant to say this in my introduction. I just want to remind our audience that we really want to hear your questions and comments and concerns. You're part of the discussion. So if you're viewing on our website, there's a chat space you can use to chat along as we're going. We're also using the hashtags ALLive and virtual reference on Twitter. So we really want to hear from you. So questions, comments, feedback, concerns, please don't hesitate, because the more involved you get with our discussion, the better this event is going to be for everybody. So with that, sorry for interrupting, Viviana. I will move on to you.
I guess my short answer is mindfulness is the way I would encapsulate it. And that would be a mindfulness about the different platforms that our users are visiting through. So here at Rutgers, I'm involved in all the different kinds of reference, the personal, in-person reference, as well as chat, as well as phone, as well as email. And I think the way that people, when you're online, and the way your user is viewing you, and really heavily influences the reference exchange. And I think a mindfulness of what they are seeing as you are discussing it, either real time or virtually, goes a long way to providing excellence in reference services. And I'm sure as we go on, we'll be talking a lot about that.
All right. Thanks, Viviana. And Francisca, you get the last word on this one.
I think that's a really important point, Viviana, and I think that is a challenge. One of the really big challenges for all of us now, I think, in the library world, but especially in public libraries, is making sure that those in rural and other isolated communities do have real access to virtual reference. It's these same communities that are less likely to have solid internet connections that give them access to the same sort of quality reference help that people in large urban areas in fairly wealthy suburbs will be able to find outside of library open hours. So I think that's a huge challenge facing us right now, especially as more and more people in isolated communities become more dependent on cell than on internet, and certainly the kind of display of online materials and online resources that are possible that way are much fewer than what is available on a robust internet connection.
All right, thank you very much, and we will. I'm really glad you brought up that digital divide issue, because we are going to be devoting some time to talking about that in a bit. But I want to start because I'm guessing we've probably got a bunch of people in our audience who are fairly new to virtual reference. Jessica on Twitter said virtual reference can be intimidating, but glad AL Live is here to help, so hopefully we can do just that. So Francisca, you were last time, so I'll let you get the first crack this time. If you're new to virtual reference, what do you think is a good starting point?
I think one of the things that's most important with virtual reference, as with any sort of reference service, is to remember the primary purpose and reason that you're doing reference work in the first place, and instead of focusing so much on how this mode could scare you, to focus on how you can make it do the work that you need it to do. Virtual reference isn't as new now, obviously, as it was 10 years ago, and I actually was on a virtual reference desk more than 10 years ago. So it's been around for a while. There are a lot of people available to help you. There are a lot of best practices available to help you. There are all sorts of wikis available, including at ALA, that are devoted to virtual reference services and best practices. And certainly the best way to start feeling comfortable in a virtual reference environment is to actually start participating in it. And that might mean that you participate as a consumer of the services and get a sense for what it's like to ask a question through something like OCLC's Question Point before you find yourself on the working side of the desk trying to handle those questions.
Okay. Sujin, let's move on to you.
Well, I agree with Francisca. I think it's important, as she said, to have a working knowledge from the point of view of the consumer. And if it's something that you are in charge of doing, start small. You know, don't think that you have to use every platform at once. Don't think that you have to master every form at once. You know, focus on getting your legs wet. Focus on becoming more familiar with being in an online environment, and just general participation outside of virtual reference. Knowing how to use different platforms on a personal and social level will also increase your degree of comfort when using the virtual environment, I would say.
Okay, thanks for that. And Viviana, we'll move on to you.
I agree with my esteemed colleagues that the best way is to jump in there and to practice, practice, practice. And I think the suggestions of either as a consumer or as a practitioner are both really good. I've been doing, I guess, the chat since Rutgers started, so it's maybe 8 years ago. I'm not sure exactly the date. And I didn't use chat in my social life, so it was totally a work thing. And the first time I was on there, I felt like Lucille Ball in the Chocolate Factory on the old I Love Lucy show, grabbing everything off the conveyor belt. Mm-hmm. I also had to let go of spelling, grammar, and that was very hard. My previous life, I was an elementary education person, so it was hard to let go. So I would say practice, 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 and embrace the medium, embrace the tool for what it is. And realize it's quick and fast. And if you need more, have the folks call you if that's applicable.
Yeah, and we did have a few people comment initially. I think Jim said this. A bunch of people sort of felt like they're multitasking too much, they're spread too thin, and it's very difficult to learn something new. Jim actually said he'd like to be a bigger part of this conversation, but he's working at a public desk while viewing the episode. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty good example, I think.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. If you have limited staff and or time resources, what can you do? And Viviana, will stick with you there.
Limited staff, meaning that I'm imagining something like you're a one-person library. I know several folks in the state of New Jersey. They're the librarian in a one-person library. I guess I'm not sure. I really don't know what kind of advice to give that kind of person. It's a lot of there's a lot of budgetary constraints. And when we were chatting before the live chat, a real consideration is the fact that this is an apparently free tool, but however, it is not. There is a real cost with regard to equipment and person power as well. To be quite honest, if you are not supported in it, I'm not sure if you're not given the leave time to do it in one way or another. I'm not sure how that would work, unless you choose to do it in your free time, and I don't think anybody is asking anybody to do that.
Yeah, and we've had a few people comment that they've had problems with their patrons just not being able to understand their limitations. They sort of, so I think someone said people expect virtual reference to be faster, and that maybe could be the case, but it's not necessarily the case. On that note, Sujin, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that libraries should never offer a service they can't deliver on. And if you are going to offer some form of virtual reference, you need to be very explicit about what you can do and the time frame in which it can be done. And if you can't provide that quality of service, rather than undermine, as I said, the quality overall, you should just not offer it. I would think in cases where there is that level of constraint, budgetary and otherwise, you should probably stick to maybe email reference and be very explicit on the tag that it will take at least 24 hours to receive a response. I think when you're very clear and upfront with your patrons, it helps to ameliorate some of the stresses and the anxiety and the misunderstandings and misconceptions about it.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, B, who's in the chat space, said you should be very clear with your audience. She said chat reference requires that you send frequent small chat messages. Users can be impatient, so a lot of people suggested if you're doing chat, using canned responses. Thank you for your chat. We'll get to it as soon as we can. And Francisca, I know you've worked with a lot of people getting them off the ground with this sort of thing.
Actually, I think that things aren't quite as dire as suggested so far. There's the power of the consortium, and things like OCLC's now supporting Question Point, which means that, yes, it's going to cost money. So the money part doesn't go away, but certainly there is huge availability of staffing via consortium, so that instead of saying, you, Jim, have to do this and this and this and this all for our system, you'll be doing this, this, and this, and then you'll be contributing as part of your work for us 2 hours a week to a consortium effort that deals with virtual reference. And all of the working through the consortium details can be really very, very complex. And it's not something that anybody at the staff level is going to be expected to be involved in, but certainly in areas where there are multiple libraries and multiple library systems and multiple types of libraries available that are in different time zones, it's a fabulous way of taking the strength of availability during my closed hours and your open hours to say that you will answer an hour's worth of questions, knowing that you have, because it's virtual reference and because it's possible to have databases that store this type of information and have it be easily retrievable. I can link directly to your catalog while I answer questions from your community, or I can link directly to your policies while I answer questions from your community. And that's really the growth of virtual reference really took off in the consortium model starting about 12 or 13 years ago. So it's not every man for himself, and I think that's really a hard thing for Americans to think about, is that maybe the way to get the work done isn't that we have to do it and you have to do it over there. We could actually build something together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk a little bit about specific platforms, and I just want to sort of get a sense. I think you've touched on this a little, but I want to talk about what fee-based products are out there and what free products are out there. And something we talked about in our pre-discussion was the idea that free products are not necessarily, they may be free in terms of not having to pay anything for the product, but there's a cost in terms of staff time and in terms of effort. So I just want to talk a little bit about what tools are out there. So Sujin, do you want to start and just name a couple that you're familiar with?
I can, but I've been out of practice for so long that I would rather someone else maybe talk about what they're using. But I was thinking about the idea of text messaging as a form of virtual reference, and the fact that it's free if you invest in the phone and you give the phone number and have people just kind of text you throughout the day. So I find that form of reference quite fascinating. And there's a walkie-talkie one that I was trying to find the name of, and I couldn't remember what form it is. But the idea, again, of the roving librarian who will have access to patrons' questions as they are roaming the floor, and that type of technology is interesting and innovative. So I will leave it to my other esteemed colleagues to get more in depth with that.
Yeah, and Viviana, what do you use in your library? I think you're the only one of our panelists who actively is working as a librarian right now.
Oh my! Well,
we have a professor, we have a consultant, and we have a librarian. So we have a nice view across the spectrum of library jobs in our panel.
Rutgers uses did use WebChat and RefChatter, which are either not very expensive or free. But I can tell you, as a day-to-day reference practitioner, I think where the future is the old saw, you meet your users where they are. I agree with Sujin. There's a big interest in text messaging, and I'm going to sound like an ad for Google, and I don't have Google stock. I don't know anybody who works for Google, but the Google products work really, really well. Google Video Chat. I mean, I think it would be kind of an amazing thing to start video chatting with some of our users. We haven't incorporated it yet, but I can see that we could easily do it. And the text message, Google lets you have a pseudo phone number, so you don't have to give out your real, you can give out the fake, not fake, but the masked phone numbers. And I am not the social media librarian. That's my colleague, Katie Anderson, but through Katie, we've had enormous interest here at the Camden campus, and I think a really solid success between the Facebook page and the text messaging. And I have the feeling in my gut that the future is going to be text messaging, because I can tell you, as in real-time reference librarian, the students come up and hand me their cell phones. And that's how we kind of interact.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of really good stuff out there, and I would say on a practical level, I'm not sure investing a whole lot of money in social media technology is worth it, because it just changes so rapidly. It's overnight. Overnight.
A lot of people in our audience are talking about video chat and screen sharing, which of course video chat we're doing right now, and we're using Google Hangouts, which is free and available to anyone. And the one, I think these are incredible tools. I think GoToMeeting also has a free platform. Tremendous potential. The one thing I always say to people as a person who runs Google Hangouts a lot is you have to remember with a free product, the not having to spend money on it is great, but it also means you're not a customer. So they can change the product and they don't have to let you know first. If something goes wrong, you don't have a number to call for customer service. Mm-hmm. So when we talked about establishing consistency, that's one thing I can say that's probably a concern with free products. And Francisca, I didn't give you a chance to respond yet, so let me move over to you.
Okay, I've actually got quite a lot to say. When we were talking about paid-for products, there is question point, and that's not buying software. That's entering the consortium and working with the members of the consortium, which is now international. So it's not as if it's a small consortium. For those of people who are tuning into this who might want to talk to someone directly who's involved in a consortium effort at doing virtual reference that's sort of full body, that is online chat with databases available. Tampa, Florida has a consortium that is involving public libraries statewide. Meanwhile, in Canada, there are 11 college libraries that are working together in the province of Ontario to provide virtual reference through a rather sophisticated proprietary platform. In terms of other things, text will take you so far, but we've been using virtual reference tools in libraries for way before these platforms were created. So, for instance, as long ago as 15 years ago in National City, California, which is actually south of San Diego, if you can imagine such a thing, and still in the United States, when they got their very first Bill Gates funded public access computers, the place where they fit in the building was in the basement, but the reference staff was 1 or 2 floors away. So what the reference staff did was install chat cameras, 2001 vintage chat cameras, at those computers so that they could help people who were looking things up on those computers without having to be in 2 places at once. Now that's 15 years ago, and I can imagine that was a library with very, very limited means and a very, very poor community. So places like that were willing to try to work with whatever tools had already been quote-unquote invented but hadn't necessarily been put to task as reference tools yet, they were already ahead of the curve. So part of it is using the free not free tools that are available, but also looking at tools that we don't even think of as reference tools and saying, how can I use this to communicate information with and talk about information with somebody somewhere else? I think it's a large dollop of creativity.
Yes, and I was trying to think of this. Someone in the chat space nailed it, though. The free term, it's free like puppies, not free like ice cream. I'd heard that before, but I forgot.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So I don't want to talk too much about Google here, but we are in the Google age, and one thing we hear a lot, and one common misconception that we're trying to dispel is the idea that we've got Google now, so we don't need reference librarians. Which, of course, we all know is not true, but it's really important to get that word out to the public, and for that reason, marketing your virtual reference services is almost as important as providing the services themselves. So I just want to get everybody's insight on what the most effective ways are to get the word out about your reference services. And Viviana, we'll start with you.
Well, this is, I think this has been a topic we've been struggling with for at least 10 years. And it's a really a deep and pervasive problem, especially the perception that Google's got it can impact so much the day-to-day life of your library, particularly with regard to when you're trying to seek funding or telling your story about the library. We used to assume that everybody knew our worth, and we can't assume that anymore. So how do you get your worth out? I think a part of a marketing stratagem, and it has to be a broad marketing stratagem on all kinds of level, social media, print, day-to-day communication. You go out there and glad hand people in person, go to community meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is really get people to understand our roles as information experts. Google, the internet is a wonderful thing. Google's a terrific search tool. But the fact that we are the guides, we are the information gurus that can lead people quickly and efficiently through the process. And that's kind of the elevator speech, I guess, that I have for my students, is that yes, there's a lot of free stuff out there. Yes, you can access things immediately, but we want you to use your time efficiently and effectively. And when it comes to, especially this day and age, the thing that really gets to me right now is that in order to have intelligent and intellectual and meaningful political conversations in our day-to-day life as citizens, we have to have good information. I mean, it's not a luxury, it's not an add-on, it's imperative to our day-to-day civic life, is to be able to sort through the noise and get to the real meat of what's going on.
I think that's an excellent point, and anyone who's read a comment section on any article on the web would probably agree with you there. Suzanne, I'm curious what you teach your students about this topic.
Yeah, well, I agree with Viviana and her broad approach to marketing and reinforcing the fact that Google can do anything. Unfortunately, in a marketing war against Google, we're going to lose. It's just not going. It's not even going to be close. But I think what we need to do is be more proactive about providing information to the public through subject guides and through other, maybe using the platform to disambiguate a lot of the confusion that abounds, so that we're showing that this is really what it means and what it takes to have an informed opinion about something, and then maybe use the tag not Google or not found on Google and give a citation at your local library campaign where we're showing that information is more than just entering some search words into a user interface and finding a ready-made answer and choosing the first one that's really sponsored. So I think our campaign would be talking about Google is great, but this is not going to answer your questions. And starting with the elementary crowd. I mean, I'm biased because I'm a children's librarian by profession. So I think just starting with children and helping them to develop those critical thinking skills, emphasizing those critical thinking skills and creating tools that they can use to bolster that would also help the cause a bit.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. And Francisca, before I ask you this, before I have you respond to this question, I want to take a quick step back because a lot of people are responding. You were talking a lot about consortial reference efforts earlier, and that's kind of emerged in the chat. A lot of people have talked about that and the sort of successes and challenges they've experienced with consortial reference. And it kind of goes back to our first point. What a lot of people are saying is when you're providing reference services across a consortium, that issue of standardization is really important.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of people have struggled with that a bit. So I just wanted to work that point in before we return to the current topic about marketing.
Okay. Yeah, and which is why at the outset I said that I think one of the biggest things for people to be aware of is the need to remember why you're doing this in the first place, not to be so consumed by the platform, but rather make sure that it's the real information, the best information, and the information that will help this particular person at this time. And I think that you need to think about differently with different platforms, but it's no different in virtual reference than it is in face-to-face. In terms of marketing, probably our work's been done for us. We just need to invest in enough posters with the Neil Gaiman quote, The internet can get you 100,000 answers for your question, but a librarian can help you find the right one. We can post them in bars, and then when the bar bets happen, people know to call us. It's not, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that question from the approach of how do we sell ourselves. I think about it in the opposite direction, as in what is it that the community needs in the way of information that can be provided by a library, and how could a library do that? And that isn't necessarily through traditional ways at all, and it isn't just by looking at our users. And I know that working in a university library, this might be very different for you, Viviana, but I would say that no, our communities have never known in a public library situation what libraries can do. Our users have known, but that's been a very small sliver of our communities, and I think we now have the potential to be of value to larger slivers of the community. But I think we have to let go of trying to sell ourselves for what we know ourselves to be and find out what it is that's needed instead.
Yeah, and I think just to use an excellent quote from the chat space, someone said, I think we should equate Google more with Wikipedia. It's the jumping off point, but it's not the end game.
Exactly.
I think that's a
always,
great
when
way.
I teach reference, I always compare Google and Wikipedia to your screwdriver and your hammer, and they're really great tools to have, but certainly you need a lot of other tools in order to build.
All right. Well, I think this is some great insight. Any other comments on marketing or making the public aware of your services from anyone? Anyone want to jump in? All right. Well, let's talk about the digital divide, because I know that's a big issue for people, especially for people in public libraries. And it seems like one of the key challenges we faced, and Francisca, you touched on this earlier, so I'll start with you here, is that there are a lot of people who are really in need of these types of services, and they're the people who have the least access to them, or at least may be under the impression that they have the least access to them. So how do we address that challenge?
I think actually, in large part, that it's not just that they're under that impression, but they actually do have less good services, primarily because they don't have robust internet connections. They don't have internet access except when they're already in the library building or some other site that probably leads them to not need to think independently. I need information beyond what I have at hand to work on this project that's taking place outside of the library or school or where I might work that has computer access. So I think it is a real challenge. I don't think it's just perceptive. How it can be resolved, I think, I don't know for sure. I think one interesting tack that can be taken is in the development of apps that are available via cell phone, smartphones, that would perhaps make some information much more explicitly attainable, even if one only had cell access. And fortunately for us, I think, that us being library land, is that so many app developers are willing to collaborate because they want to build things and they need to know what would be good to build. So certainly information-based ones that could make access to things like federal databases of health readily attainable on a cell phone are all things that could enrich the reference environment for isolated populations.
All right, thanks, Francisca. Do you address this with your students, Sujin?
I do. We do talk a lot about the digital divide, but not necessarily not only from the perspective of patrons not having access to the technology or the infrastructure to access these services, but again, the mindfulness that Viviana, I think, mentioned earlier, being aware that there are some patrons who it would be great for them to access these services, but they don't have the capacity to use the technology, and then finding ways to get the information to them through different means. And so that, again, there are so many considerations, which is why as much as we're discussing virtual reference, we also have to pay attention to not sacrificing the other forms of reference that can be beneficial to those who just can't navigate and negotiate the technology to get their information needs met.
And Viviana, does this touch on? Do you run into this issue in your job at an academic library?
Every day, because we are in Camden, New Jersey, which is one of the poorest. It is the poorest city in New Jersey, but it's also one of the poorest cities in this country. And we have, as part of our mission is we serve the general public. The citizens of Camden are very welcome and do come in. And it's almost a heartbreaking reality every day, because those of us who are privileged to have, I'm sitting here with 2 monitors and a high-speed internet connection, and I got a smartphone, and I have, I'm not bragging. This is pretty typical. I mean, this is just more average. And have folks that walk in the door, they don't know how to use a mouse.
Yeah.
And everything, a person's entire public life now is pretty much on the web. In order to, file a tax return, in order to get benefits, in order to get, any kind of government subsidy, in order to apply for a job at McDonald's, you have to be able to have a robust internet connecting. You might have to have access to a fax machine. You have to know how to download or read a PDF. And this is all a very real thing, and it really impacts people's day-to-day lives. And that's just kind of the socioeconomic aspect of the digital divide. There's also digital divides by age cohorts. There's cultural digital divides. So yeah, it's a real life thing. And I agree, Sujin, that I think there's still very much a need for a person-to-person interaction. And, again, I think we have to be thoughtful about that, not to equate mobile internet access to a robust internet access that folks might need for just being part of society.
Mm-hmm. And someone in our audience made a really good point. They said if you're talking about the digital divide, we should also talk a little bit about the generational divide.
Yeah.
And the fact that virtual services may not feel as comfortable to people of some ages as they do to others. So Sujin, I want to start with you there. Do you talk about that in your courses?
Yes, we do. We talk about every aspect of ways in which a person can be dispossessed by technology. I also teach a course on community informatics, which is pretty much all about that, and being aware of the need, again, and the varying needs and levels of competence, and as Viviana just said, what the things in which you have to have access in order to be a participant in a democracy. And particularly for senior citizens, that's challenging, because there is this sense of the digital native and a child being born into the technology that they just fall into, so they have no sense of what went before, and so it's a given that these children will just be comfortable with technology. And the difference between their interactions and the interactions of their parents or their grandparents, and it's just not something that you can be as comfortable with if you're not born into it. It doesn't mean, however, that you cannot acquire the competence. So again, there's a certain degree of proactivity or proactive measures that a librarian can take to ensure that senior citizens are included in their programming and included in their outreach, not just in ensuring that they have the maybe the paper version of what is needed, but that they can have an opportunity to use the technology and to develop a level of comfort that would at least encourage their participation, and not assume that because they're of a particular generation that we don't need to also include them in the discourse.
And Francisca, I know this is something you encounter quite a bit as a trainer.
Yeah, and actually, the age divide is, at this point, more closely attuned to different cultural groups than it is generically in just age cohorts. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. But to get back to virtual reference, one of the other ways of responding to this kind of need, the needs that to be connected enough to apply for jobs, to apply for aid, etc., is for the library services themselves to take place outside of the library building. And so moving into what you might call virtual, although I wouldn't call it virtual, but rather community-based reference work in which you have, for instance, in the Halifax Regional Library in Nova Scotia, there's actually a librarian who works not only without a building, but also doesn't work from a bookmobile. She simply is stationed somewhere in a rural community, different place, several days a week, and is available to work with people who have these sorts of connection needs or information needs that they don't even realize could be answered via virtual resources, so to speak, and doesn't expect them to make the trip into a building called a library. For 30 years, the Oakland City Hall in California had a public library reference staff member on staff at City Hall in order to, wow, in order to respond to government-based reference questions from city staff, but also from the public who was visiting City Hall, who would think to visit City Hall if they had a problem, a civic problem that they needed to resolve, but wouldn't necessarily think of going to the library building. So that's another way to think about virtual reference services. Where do you put the staffing point?
Mm-hmm. And Viviana, your thoughts on the generational divide?
Yeah. As we all know, no generation is a monolith. When Gen M, because there are college students, their college age students are of particular interest to me, but of course within each group there's extreme differences, and as Francisca said, cultural differences. International students are going to be different from those born and raised in white suburbia United States. So there's also a difference of expectation. So, I think we've identified that different cohorts, be it age or socioeconomics, have different skills, different levels of access, and different levels of acceptance of virtual mediums. I think as librarians and information professionals, we also need to kind of have be awake and aware about the expectations of the users as they come to us.
Yes.
So, for example, and this is not meant as a slap at Barnes & Noble, but because Barnes & Noble has a terrific help desk, but I call it the Barnes & Noble mentality. When folks come up to the reference desk, I want to know if you have such and such a book, which is fine. That's a perfectly legit reference question. But what I try to sneak in is the educational aspect of and this is also true be it in person or online or any of the virtual platforms, is I try to let me teach you how you can do this yourself. Let me teach you the research skills, and so that you can become an independent, lifelong learner. So I think I would add to the other things that Sujin and Francisca mentioned, also the idea of librarians' awareness of expectations and meeting the user and trying to teach the user, educate the user to become an independent researcher.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. And we've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to a conversation about ethics because I think it's extremely important, and the audience really wants to hear about it too. We're getting a lot of questions there. So I think when it comes to the ethics of providing virtual reference, there are two angles that are sort of not contradictory, but you can kind of come at it from two sides. And so I'm going to sort of ask two questions in one here to everybody. But the first issue is we need to take the same set of ethics and the same codes of conduct and apply them from an in-person environment to an online environment and try to replicate that, which can be a challenge. But then on the other side, and we talked about this a little bit in our pre-event discussion, when you're dealing with someone online, they're inherently much more anonymous, and you don't necessarily know who you're talking to, so you have much less of a sense of who is asking, and that could potentially be an issue depending on the questions being asked. So I want to start with you, Francisca, and we'll talk ethics. And I invite our audience again to chime in. I know you guys probably have your own opinions on this as well.
I have a couple of things to say. First of all, the 8 tenets of ALA's ethics code certainly apply to virtual references to anything else. And I did take a peek just now at the Twitter stream going by, and I see that there's a question about privacy. So I actually want to talk about that and segue into something else that Viviana and I were talking about the other day. And that is that certainly in, let's say, this is going to sound really silly, but the traditional virtual reference space, so that is a place where the chat will be recorded. The text chat will be kept for analysis sake to say, Joe Smo, you need to bone up a little bit on this, or it looks like we're getting, rashes all over the country of people asking about turquoise lemons, that kind of thing. Needs to always be divorced. Such keepsakes always need to be divorced from who asked them. So we can save the questions and the responses as models, but we can't save who said it for privacy's sake. Also, there is the the ethical precept that we have intellectual freedom in this country, and that intellectual freedom applies to information. So while you may not have the intellectual freedom to pose for, take, or share child pornography, and you do not have freedom to do that, you do have the intellectual freedom to ask and discuss breast health care. Even if you're only 12 years old, you still have that freedom. And that's no different in the virtual realm than it is in the face-to-face realm. It can be uncomfortable, it can be squishy and ishy for some adults. It's really important for adults to remember their own boundaries. One of the virtues of virtual reference spaces is that we can sometimes get people help more directly, put them through to help more directly than we could in face-to-face, where we could hand somebody a phone number on a piece of paper and hope they called the phone number. Here it is possible to actually dial in and get somebody from the local 211, wherever that local may be, mobile mental health crisis, if that seems to be what the person needs and wants. Viviana, you and I the other day were talking about bomb making. So I don't know, Dan, can we go back and forth here for a minute? Because we differ in our opinions.
Not that we were making bombs.
No, we were making none.
This conversation.
Yeah, is that tossed to me?
Yeah, yeah, that was an awkward toss over to you.
Sorry.
Not awkward at all. No, I agree with Francisca completely. Sometimes I feel since 9/11 and since the quick enactment of the Patriot Act, this has been one of those not little, this is one of those things that I get out my soapbox and I stand on to talk about. I think librarians are one of the, I feel we're the guardians, that we are the helping profession, we are the public servants that must stand up for free speech, that must stand up for civil liberties. And I think this is a sentiment shared by every librarian I've come into contact with. And librarians have been at the forefront of fighting for the protection of intellectual freedom, fighting for the protection for the freedom of read, fighting for the protection of being free to search, search the internet, unfettered and unencumbered with economic restraints. I think that as professionals, that we should, there's common sense, of course, but I think we should this is me, I think we should always err on the side of free speech and civil liberty. Where common sense comes into cause when there's a clear and definitive threat to either the person's self, suicide, a suicide call, a virtual suicide call of some sort, or a very clear-cut threat to others. My colleagues here and practice folks, online might differ, but my experience is those are very, very rare. I can't think of, in the 20-something years I've been a librarian, I've never encountered, a threat, a security threat. So this is such a vitally important issue, and I think the American Library Association, it really is to be commended, highly commended, as a protector of the civil liberties that we still have in the United States. So.
All right, so Jen, I'll let you get the final word on this portion of our discussion.
There isn't much to add to that. We have a code of ethics, and just on the question of bomb making, I think if someone really wanted to make a bomb, they wouldn't really access virtual reference to do it. So, right, I think we're safe there. But yeah, I think we should always err on the side of intellectual freedom and freedom of access to information and all of the things that we stand for as a profession. Otherwise, it's not like that's someone who needs information in the information age cannot access it otherwise. And I would rather them have a useful and informed and thoughtful and vetted somewhat information than to just not come to us because they are concerned about how it may be perceived. So.
And we did one thing that actually didn't come up in our conversation. We have a few school librarians in our audience, and a lot of them have expressed concern over kids using virtual reference as a way to troll or prank the library. I guess that has happened.
It has happened, and it's boundaries again. I mean, back in the day when this was all new, we would have hours on end of the same question over and over again that was, very clearly planned by a group of 8th graders somewhere in God knows where. But you just answer the questions, because if you get into it, if you say, look, I already answered 7 times in the last 5 minutes why the song Purple Haze is called Purple Haze. First of all, I'm giving away somebody else's privacy. Somebody else had this question, and I'm telling you somebody else had this question. And second of all, that's taking up more time than just answering the question and moving on. And just in the same way that, 60 kids came into the library that had legitimately the same assignment, each one should be treated as if it's a unique question to that kid, because it is. So yeah, they're going to prank.
Yeah. And again, I'd rather they pranked us than otherwise.
Really?
The teachable moment.
And elementary school students aren't the only one who prank the, the web chats and the email chats. I can tell you that.
Yeah. They may actually be the more mature ones. I'm not sure.
Yeah. They have to
exactly.
get to homework at some point.
Yes.
Well, we've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to end, as we always try to do, looking towards the future and talking about new horizons. So I just want to ask everyone, and we'll do just sort of a quick round robin again. What are the changes you'd like to see in libraries with virtual reference in the near future? How would you like to see things look different in the next 3 to 5 years? And Viviana, we'll start with you.
What I would like to see, I guess, is from the user's point of view. I think that the Face of America, well, I shouldn't be so, but the reference we do here in the United States is going to be changing dramatically because the demographics are changing dramatically. We're going to have a large number of users, hopefully they'll be coming to us as users, of folks like returning vets with disabilities and all kinds of disabilities. So, for the planners, the administrators, those of us who are involved with the creation of these tools, it's like, again, I guess my theme for this thing is awareness that, disability awareness, cultural awareness, language awareness, because there might be unseen barriers with regard to, translations and then understanding, and a sensitivity to cultural differences, be it socioeconomic or age or whatever. So.
All right, thanks, Viviana. Sujin?
Oh, can I say Viviana took my answer?
You can add on.
I think that's exactly it. With anything that we do and anything we set out to really, any service we set out to provide, we need to be sensitive to the needs of the user, and the platform should also be designed with those considerations in mind. And so, yeah, I would like to see that very much happen.
All right, thank you, Sujin. And finally, Francisca, we'll let you get the last word today.
All of what's been said before and beyond that, I would hope, I don't know whether I can go so far as to say that I expect, but I would hope to see us plying our information expansion trade outside of the traditional buildings and traditional settings in which we've been doing it, so that we do, in fact, make information available to a much wider swath of our communities.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists and our audience, Francisca, Sujin, and Viviana. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience. I know we haven't been able to get to everybody's questions and comments, or even close, because there have been so many, but we really appreciate your engagement, and we encourage you to keep the conversation going on Twitter. No reason to stop now. We will be talking next month on February 11th about RDA, so we hope you'll join us then. And to everyone, I just want to say have a wonderful day, stay warm, and thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.